So no matter what I do with the auto white balance eyedropper here in Lightroom Classic, I'm just not getting a very good reading, but this definitely has some color cast issues. So there are easy enough ways to fix this, which we can do in Photoshop here with some simple color corrections here. And you can see just turning those on. Here we've got some really good even color. Here we've got a lot of those color cast issues. Now we could fix this quite a bit in Lightroom Classic, but we're gonna need to take a look at this in Photoshop because there are actually two problems going on here. The first one is just indicative of any real estate interior photography, and that's that the white balance is going to change throughout a space. It won't have an even color temperature. We can correct a lot of that using Flash, but we still have a few issues that are going to arise. The second issue is that was a very colorful room. So when you're in a room that has a lot of different color temperatures already, and then you have color that's casting off of all kinds of other colors of walls and off of the flooring, rugs, all that type of stuff, then we're gonna have a color balance issue as well. But we can correct all of that. I'm gonna show you some easy techniques to do that, so let's get started. The first thing we want to do is actually identify where the color problems are coming from, and that is deceiving because without this color correction on here, we can see that there are some variations. For instance, there's some magenta here. The walls may look okay, and we can try to sample colors from all around here, just like we would with the eyedropper, but we can get a series of different colors and not get something that's necessarily exact. We can see that there's a lot of magenta cast in here, but it's going to vary throughout the scene and to what degree. Also, some of this will just have warm tones in it, so we need to be able to differentiate and identify where this is coming from. The easy way to do that is with a very simple technique. Now let's just back up here just a second, take a look at what we've got here. If we go down to the very bottom here, this is an ambient only shot. I use this just for reference because later that was used as a luminance layer for doing the flambient blending. So I did do a flash shot, and you can see I've got even color throughout compared to when I was up against just this ambient shot, which does have a variety of color casts because of various light sources from not just this lamp, but also what's coming in from the outside. And then of course the sun's reflecting hard off this floor, which is causing other color casts. And we do have this lamp over here as well. So getting the flash in there with the proper exposure, I'm able to then even out the color a lot more. But when I add ambient luminance to it, then we start seeing some of those other problems start to reveal themselves. But they're very minor, they're very minute, and it can be hard to see where all the problems are coming from. If you were to ignore the ceiling and just go in here to the wall, that looks fine. It really doesn't look that bad. But once you start sampling colors then from around here, that's when you're gonna see it's like, well, there are magentas that are showing up. There are heavy reds that are showing up in some of this paint that actually looks neutral. So let's identify the colors first, and it's a very simple thing to do. What you want to do is you want to go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and then you want a Vibrance layer. Name it whatever you'd like, and then you want to set Vibrance and Saturation both to 100. Now I know this looks bad, don't worry, this is only for identifying the problems. And as you can see, it now shows in greater detail where our color problems are with a lot of heavy magenta that's going on in here. And we can see that there are also a lot of heavy reds as well. So the next thing to do is start applying some color corrections. Now, I have a whole variety of color correction techniques that I show in my course on expert editing for real estate photography, and I've got a link to that as well as my other courses and books down in the description for this video. Here, we're going to use one technique where we're going to be changing the color balance. What we'll do is below our throwaway layer, which is this vibrance layer, remember that's just to identify what's going on. When I go above then the other layer that I'm working with, which is below then our vibrance and saturation that's really cranked up to identify what's going on, down here I'm going to add a color balance layer. So you would go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and then Color Balance. Name it whatever you'd like. In this case, I know that the magentas are very heavy. So on the magenta green slider, I'll start moving this a little bit to the right. So I start seeing that some of the magentas are starting to go away. Don't try to get rid of all of them. You want to see that you're starting to get some improvement. Now with all the reds here, that tells me I might want to cool it just a little bit. So I'll take the reds down just a tad also. And then you can see where you are by turning off our identification layer, that vibrance layer. So now that I have that turned off, that's starting to look better from just the color balance layer. And what I can do then is turn the color balance layer on and off and see if there's improvement. And sure enough, this is without it, this is with it. And we're starting to see a big improvement. So I'll put back in the window pole here so we can see the full thing of everything that's going on. If I start from the very top now and I select the eyedropper tool, then I can start sampling colors from the top down if I have sample all layers selected here. So I can then judge color throughout the entire frame. And I can see that there's still a little bit of magenta going on here. When I get to some of these, there is too, but it's in a very low saturation area. So the problem is, do I want to now decrease that all the more, that magenta, and more into the greens, or is that going to start polluting stuff? So we don't want to push it too far. We can go back, for instance, into our color balance layer, and we could, even without seeing where our colors are coming from, try to see now if I move that green slider a little bit, does that help? Am I pushing it too far? Now the other thing with magenta is that it also can have a blue element to it. So with that then, I might want to think, well, down here on this blue slider, I might want to bring in just a little bit more yellow to it. Now we can see what it looks like with or without it by just turning that layer off. That's where it was. Take this out of the way and then turn it back on, and these are our color corrections. So far so good, but we're not all the way there yet. We can go back here and identify once again where our colors are coming from, and without the color balance layer we can see that there is a great improvement with that magenta tone, but obviously we can still see there are magentas there. Now we can take care of the ceiling just by its own, but we can see over here that we are definitely seeing still magenta on the fireplace. So still need to do a little bit more corrections, but I wouldn't do it the color balance layer. Instead, at this point, this is where we're going to be identifying the second biggest problem, which is the distribution of color throughout a very colorful room like this. So what we would do next is to take a curves layer. And you might have seen me do something here along these lines with an auto setting in one of my prior videos, and I'll have a link to that in the description of this video as well, so you can check that out. But what we're going to do is then add a curves layer by going up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and then Curves Layer. Now in this curves layer, which notice it's above our color balance layer, and also our identification layer is off, and all this is below the darken mode window pole, which is here, because we don't have a problem with the outside colors. So we don't want to be applying any of these adjustments to that. All these are below. So on the curves layer, in its properties, go up to the little hamburger icon, and then you go to Auto Options. And then in here, it's usually good to select the Enhance per Channel, Contrast, and then Snap to Neutral Midtones. And you can see over here, it started adjusting the colors, but it did so across the tonal range. That helps with distributed color throughout a large area. So let's say OK on that, and then we'll just collapse this and take a look at before and after. So this is with the curves adjustment, this is without it. Now you notice it's also changing some of the brightness. So what you can do is change the curves layer, instead of in normal mode, put it into color mode. And now when you turn it on and off, you'll just see the colors are changing and not the brightness or luminance. Okay, if that's looking good, but you still have some problems up here on the ceiling, this is a super simple fix. What I'm going to do is zoom out just a little bit, and I'm going to grab the Quick Selection Object tool. So go over here to Quick Selection and select the Object Selection tool. Make sure that you have the lasso selected, and then draw a lasso just roughly around the ceiling. You don't have to get very exact. When you release it, it's going to detect the ceiling almost every single time. You can see that it did. And now I would apply an action, which I'll do here. What that did is it just added a hue saturation layer to that selection, and then it desaturated some of that color. Now up here I had this beautiful medallion inset here, so I want to use that object selection tool once again, and I'll just grab around here real quick, and once it selects that, then I will just delete that from the mask of the hue saturation layer, press Ctrl D to deselect. And now just to see before and after what we did, I'm going to take our new layers that we just worked with, I'm going to select all of them, and I'm going to group those into a new group. So I'll call this one our new color. And now what we can do is turn that off and on and see the difference. So this is with our color corrections. This is then without it. So once again, this is after. This is before. So now with all of our color corrections applied here, we can see that we have a much better image, but it did take more work than just using the temp and tint sliders. So this is in your back pocket when you really need to get the correct colors. The higher up you go in level of real estate photography, when you're in luxury photography, architectural photography, colors will become so important to get highly accurate. Trying to use a gray card in a room like this that just has so many different color sources just aren't going to work even with flash, which we can see here even when doing just basic flambient, because we're getting different colors throughout. We're struggling with competing light sources and their various color temperatures to be able to get an even color balance, which is no such thing using just the temp and tint sliders. But by applying our different techniques that we did here, by first identifying where our color problems were coming from, and then adjusting our colors by using a color balance, and then also curves to get it right across the tonal range, and a little bit of extra finesse on the ceiling, then we've got an image that is much better and much more accurate in color with the correct white balance.